All right, so I wrote this book called, yeah, I need that darn. Do you want me to take the
Do you
little?
love Helen?
Yeah, I'll do the little color. I don't see a light. So I wrote this book called What They Don't Teach Teens, and this session is about my book. I've distributed 8 or 9 throughout. Those are just samples. Feel free to look at them and then pass them along. Before I get into the book, let me tell you a little bit more about myself. Again, my name is Jonathan. And speaking about my book is not my day job. My day job for the last 23 years is I've been a prosecutor for the city of Los Angeles. I feel very fortunate to have that position. I see every day that I'm on the job the mistakes that young people are making. Now, it was incredibly unlikely I'd ever become a lawyer, let alone a prosecutor who enforces the laws. Because when I was a teenager, I was disregarding a few laws. I was a troubled teen growing up in LA. I was a good kid. I got pivoted off path. Had a difficult, time as an adolescent. Made those mistakes. Some of them nearly cost me my life. But here I am, thankfully. And I wouldn't go back to those years. They were very, very hard for me. But I miss my hair. Also, a lot of teaching I do in LA County on sexual violence prevention. But the most important thing to know about me is that I'm a father to 3 monsters. And so there I am with my 3 sons. Son number 1 is 21 now, 2 is 19, and 3 is 15. Now, why do I put these masked monsters in here? Because my boys don't like their faces in my presentation. I asked them, they said, "No way, Dad. I do teach at their schools as well, so that may have something to do with it." And so my wife Lisa and I were talking about what our own sons needed to go through adolescence, hopefully as successfully as possible, because they are going to make mistakes. And as important as English, history, math, science, the traditional school subjects are, we want them to learn more than what most schools will teach them, and that's why I wrote the book. Now, I get a lot of questions, okay, but tell us why. You don't just write a book because you want to teach your kids something. So I'll very quickly tell you how I came to write the book, because I did not think I'd ever write a book. So I'm sitting on the sofa with my wife Lisa. Of course, that's not me. We all know why that's not me. It's just a recreation. Okay, so I'm sitting on the couch with Lisa. Lisa says to me, "It's time we teach our boys about sexual consent." Of course we should. But it got me thinking, what other topics should we be teaching our sons that we can't depend on their school to teach them? And so I just instantly started making a list. We got to teach them about their digital footprint. What to do, what not to do when they get pulled over by the police. What are their rights? Can the police search them? What are the rules of engagement? Also, what does it mean to cyberbully someone? What kind of the target of cyberbullying do to seek help? What is a healthy, intimate relationship? Sexual consent? When does a relationship turn violent? What are the signs? What are the potential consequences of underage sexting? Situational awareness, street safety. My list was long. So I figured I wasn't the only parent or educator who wanted their children to learn this information, or the children they care for. So I went searching for the book that I wanted. I went to bookstores. I found nothing. I went to libraries. I found nothing. I did internet searching. I looked high. I looked low. I looked for the book, and I couldn't find it. So I circled back to Lisa a few weeks later. I said, "I've looked everywhere. There's no book. Let's watch TV." But no. She couldn't let it go. And so she told me, she insisted that I write the book I was looking for, and like a good husband, I listened. And I'm really glad I did. Now, it wasn't 2,000 years. It felt like 2,000 years. It was 5 years of brutality. I've had a lot of challenges in my life, folks. This was my biggest challenge. This was a hard thing to do, and I'm awfully grateful I did, because the book's come out really well. It's something I'm proud of, and it's been helping a lot of people. All right, so I did not bring books to sell. It is available on Amazon. When I did my session yesterday, I couldn't let those books go because I needed them for today. However, because I don't need to lug them back on the plane, if anyone wants any of the books that are out there, you can just see me after. I'll give you my Venmo. But again, I don't make my living as an author. I'm not here to sell books. I'm here to share information from my book and hope that you find it useful as you work with youth and their families. Okay, so the book is divided into 3 sections. And what we're going to do today in the limited time, I'm going to first just lay out the interior of the book in the sections, and then I'm going to talk about a minute or 2 on each chapter, and then I'll take questions. Okay, so the first part, and I'm sorry it's getting cut off, it's dealing with the police and street safety. First chapter, your rights with the police, 4th and 5th Amendment, when they can search you, when you may have to answer their questions. Chapter 2, safer police interactions, what to do, what not to do when you get pulled over by the police, in your car or on foot. Chapter 3 is street safety, situational awareness, things along those lines. So that's part 1. We're going to get back to that in a few minutes. Part 2, sexual violence and misconduct, sexual assault and consent, sexual harassment at school, sextortion, online sexual blackmail. Again, we're going to come back very briefly to all of these. Dating violence in chapter 7. Jumping to part 3 of my book, which is about online safety. We have digital footprint and citizenship, digital data privacy, cyberbullying, and the biggie, smartphone cameras. Man, I could have written a whole book just on that topic, and any of these, but really that's a big one. So again, we're going to come back to this in just a minute. I want to walk you through the interior for those of you who haven't seen the book, making its way around the room. Okay, every chapter is going to start with key takeaways. And is this blurry for you guys, or is this okay? Could it be sharpened up a little bit? Oh, it probably could be sharpened. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Excellent. All right. And then there's going to be chapter highlights on the second page into the chapter. Everyone takes away something different from the material. So if I read a chapter, the things that are most important to me are probably different than you. So at the end of each chapter, I ask the reader, what are the 3 things from this chapter that are most important to you? Helps deliver the information, people think about what they read, and so on. Also in every chapter, what would you do if it happened to you? These are like real life hypothetical scenarios. And essentially there's 1 or 2 of these with multiple questions. There's no right or wrong answer. Just want the reader to process and think, if these things happen, how would I handle them? And then I give some thoughts about, some things you may want to consider as you fill this out. Again, there's no right or wrong answer to the what would you do if it happened to you, but it gives some ideas as well. There's a resource guide, where can I get help on any of these issues at the end of each chapter. And then finally, there is a 10-question quiz at the end of each chapter on the material from that chapter, and there's an answer key with pinpoint sites to the material that is at the end of the book. And then lots of images. I always like, who doesn't like pictures in their books, right? And there's not enough. I think the reader just get through the material. And the reader of the book is anyone from 6th grade through, grandparents, people, anyone of any age. Basically, I've written it to be actionable, accessible, and for anyone of any reading level and skill, starting about 5th or 6th grade and on. Okay, last before I get into the content itself, we want young people to make informed decisions, but yet we're not giving them information. And that's really what this is about. It's about information. And I guess I feel it's partly to absolve myself of guilt, and let me explain. This is what I think. If one of my sons or all of them, if they mess up, and I didn't tell them, okay, well, this is what happens. What can happen if your deed gets out to the unintended recipient? This is how it might go. If I don't explain to them, hey, this is what cyberbullying is, and they mess up, I'm going to feel some responsibility. But once I give them the information, they can make informed decisions. It's on you. to make the right decision. And it's really about prevention, trying to prevent these things from happening rather than an intervention. Okay, so what I'm going to do, as I mentioned, just going to keep checking time. I'm going to give you like a minute or two on the first 3 chapters, and then I'm going to take questions on that part of the book, and then I'll do the same thing. Now, talking about one of these chapters in a minute or two, not very easy to do, but I'll just give you some very high-level highlights of what is in that chapter, and then again, I'm happy to take questions. Okay, your rights with the police, 4th Amendment, this is going to cover the 4th and 5th Amendments. 4th Amendment, when can the police search my stuff, my backpack, my car, my house, my phone? 5th Amendment, essentially, when they ask me questions, do I have to answer? And the answer to that question is no. You don't ever have to talk to the police. Now, you have to identify yourself if they suspect you of a crime. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't. You don't have to consent to searches, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't. I get into that. Also, you can't talk about policing in this country without talking about racial injustice. And so there's a whole lot about that, and not just in policing. There is racial injustice throughout the criminal justice system, whether it's prosecutors who are unethical, judges who disproportionately sentence people of color to longer sentences, parole, probation, you name it. There's all sorts of injustices. So that's tackled head on right out of the gate. Safer police interactions, chapter 2. When you get pulled over, a lot of young drivers, adults too, they just instantly reach in their glove box. All right, I know I'm going to have to give them that stuff. Oh my gosh, don't reach for anything until a police officer tells you to. Put your hands on the wheel. If it's at nighttime, turn on the dome light. No matter how you feel about the police, it is always in your best interest to be respectful. Should you be hurt physically if you're disrespectful to the police? Of course not. But you just don't know what's going to happen. Now, I have plenty of police officers who are my friends, and I like them and I respect them, but there's a lot that needs to change in policing in America. We arrest a lot of people, we put them in prisons, and maybe that's not the best place for them. And I'm a prosecutor, guys. I'm caught up in it, but that doesn't mean we don't need meaningful reform. Now, when I sent these 2 chapters, when I drafted them years ago, I sent them to 3 police officers that I'm friends with, and they have teenagers. Right? At the time, they were teenagers. And I asked all 3 the same question. Here are my 2 chapters. Please read them for me. Are you upset with me because I'm giving you the tools of the trade? Right? I'm just telling everybody what they ought to know. And most prosecutors don't do that. Most prosecutors don't tell people, like, you don't have to consent to a search. And all 3 of them said the exact same thing to me. And they said, I have no problem with you, Jonathan. What do you think I taught my own kids? I said, whoa, that was eye-opening to me. Like, all right, you know what? This is fair game. So those are the police chapters. Street safety is about situational awareness, trusting your gut instinct, the power of your intuition. It's also about, I ask teens when I teach on the street safety, so I ask them, I go, okay, you're walking down the street, you have your iPhone out or your phone, and someone comes up to you and wants to take it. What do? I fight, I run. There's no way I'm giving up my phone. What? Never done. I don't care. It's shocking to me how many young people wouldn't just give up their phone. Crazy to me. Like, at least half say they wouldn't give it up. So I deliver the message, you're way more important than your material things. If this is how you can keep yourself safe. But if for some reason something happens, give up your material goods. Your life is worth a lot more. And in my opinion, the most important thing from chapter 3 is situational awareness, which I already mentioned. And that's using your eyes, your ears, your intuition as you go about your daily life. For example, when you're walking home at night, don't have both headphones in. Take one out. I see my son, my 19-year-old, he comes home from work, we live close to where he works, he comes home at 10 p.m., I open the door, and he has his headphones in. Well, what are you doing, man? Didn't you read the book? Come on, just listen to your music. I'm not trying to jam you up. But you could put one in, and now you can stay situational aware. Okay, so that's part one, I would, I think it's better if I take some questions right now, if you have questions about part one. The way this normally works is that when I say, who's got a question? No one's going to put their hand up. And then one brave person will, and then there'll be more questions. Yes, please.
We run a data reporting center, and if we were working with youth and utilizing your book in talking with them about some of these things and having the research that you've done and so on and so forth, is these 3 chapters walking down, giving legal advice, if you will, since you are an attorney, I'm not?
Yeah, no, the book is written, if I were giving legal advice, I'd have to write 50 books because the laws are different in every state. So essentially it's best practices. Because, like, for example, not reaching for your stuff when the police pull you over, that's a best practice.
For sure.
And I will say that I got pulled over about a year and a half ago, and I was with my eldest son. He was then a senior in high school. And it was a good stop. I should have been pulled over. Okay, I broke the law. And so the police officer rolled down my window, he walks up to me, and before he can say a word, my son in the passenger seat starts yelling at me. I just about died. At the same time, the officer and I said, "You be quiet." Now, what if I weren't there? What if my son were a person of color? How would that have gone? So, yeah, no, it's just best practices across the board.
Thank you.
My name's June. I work for the Early Nebraska, so we always are teaching our students this. I have
Great.
3 daughters that are all Afro-Latinas, so I don't know what you teach to kids who know that these situations happen and you could do everything right and it still ends wrong. What do you say to those kids?
Yeah, okay, so if anyone didn't hear
They're
that.
like in fight and flight, so they will just go.
Yeah, so one of the things I say in here is, don't run from the police's perspective. If you run, they think you've done something. If you run, they think you have a gun, because pretty much everyone has a gun. There's a lot of guns out there. With respect to people, particularly of color, people who are indigent, people who have certain disabilities, who may think, well, why do I need to know my rights? The police aren't going to respect them. I don't tell them otherwise. That's their experience, that's how they feel. I would never try to convince someone otherwise. And I hear when I teach at schools, I will commonly have a person of color raise their hand and say, why do I need to know this? The police aren't going to respect my rights. I would never argue with that person. What I do like to point out is that when we know our rights, it can help keep us calmer, and being calm is good for us and it's good for the police. Also, if the interaction goes down and your rights were violated and you know your rights, you can more easily hold the police accountable. And it doesn't, I make it very clear, it doesn't always go the way it's supposed to go. And at the end of the day, if you're asserting your rights and you are treated with great hostility, I get asked, what do I do? Well, the most important thing you can do is make it home safe. And if you're exercising your rights and you feel that by doing that, you may get violence inflicted on you, you gotta stop. Make it home safe, whatever you gotta do. And there is no guarantees, agreed. There's some police who just won't respect your rights. I think most will, but definitely know that some won't. Yes?
For those for us that are using it with youth that we're working with, do you have like a main workbook that has like the quizzes and
I do not. I've gotten asked that before. And I've also gotten asked if I'm going to write another book. And I just don't think I have it in me. But I should, because that would be actually a good idea. I could just pull out all the quizzes. But no, I do not have one yet. Yes?
I don't have a question, just a comment on the safety, the street safety issue and what you brought up about the headphones. I found that, technology advances and they've been more conscientious of safety because now there are the headphones that you can still listen to what's going around at the same time.
Yeah, the transparency or the,
the ones that get the vibration of the.
Yeah, the vibration ones, but I haven't seen any kids wearing those. But they will.
Yes,
There's
they
vibrations
will,
that don't sit right on your ears. That's right. All right, any other questions about this? Shall we move into part 2? All right, let's jump into part 2. Sexual assault and consent. So, according to the author, anyone who picks up the book will see that on the first page of this chapter, I say, in my opinion, this is the most important chapter in the book. Why did I say that? There's a lot of important stuff in here. Well, the reason is, a lot of people won't get jammed up by the police. Some will. Most people probably won't have to deal with the cyberbullying, or some will. But most, if not all, most all of our children at some point are going to have a sexual interaction. And there's no maybe, there's no middle ground. You either have consent or you don't. And where young people are at, really a big part of this chapter is explaining the difference between affirmative and implied consent, and why those are different, and why are they important to understand. And you could be in a relationship and practice affirmative consent, and then at some point you transition to implied, which is really important to understand it too. And also, the biggie in the chapter is alcohol. Okay? Alcohol doesn't cause sexual assault. I think we all know that. But the data shows us that high alcohol consumption and sexual assault frequently co-occur. So they're probably at some point going to be drinking. So when does someone have too many drinks and they can't give you consent? There's not an exact number, but someone who's drunk cannot give consent. Someone who's incapacitated cannot give consent. And so I spent a fair amount of time in that chapter explaining that, the dynamic. There's so many rape myths, victim blaming, so I address a lot of those. So again, my opinion, that's the most important chapter. Reasonable minds get different. Okay, chapter 5, sexual harassment. Sexual harassment in school is something that happens oftentimes right in front of teachers, right in front of school administrators, and it is frequently dismissed and trivialized by others, by students as well. Yet sexual harassment, severe sexual harassment, can be incredibly traumatizing to the target of that harassment. And so the chapter is really an explanation of why that is, how that happens, what can a witness do, because sexual harassment is like sexualized bullying. Okay? Bullying is not a one-time act, it's repeated. And sexual harassment is a repeated act. And bullies like an audience most of the time. Harassers like an audience. So it's happening in front of other people, but it's regularly minimized. And we've heard about those terrible stories about targets of cyberbullies and the self-harm. It's the same thing with sexual harassment, severe sexual harassment. The targets of sexual harassment are hurting, and they deserve help. And I talk about Title IX, the federal law related to gender discrimination. Now, schools need to have a Title IX coordinator if they take federal funds. Even if they don't take federal funds, the school should have a policy in the handbook that makes clear what their responsibilities are for addressing sexual harassment. Chapter 6, sextortion. Online sexual blackmail. As I mentioned to the audience yesterday, I cried 3 times over the 5 years I was writing my book. Like, cried, okay? 2 of the times, I was just exhausted, and I was fed up, and I didn't want to write this thing a minute longer. And the reason I kept writing, because I wanted to quit. Every day I wanted to quit. I was writing this book. I thought, oh, my boys will just make fun of me. They're just going to bust my chops. Dad, we knew you wouldn't do it, or Dad, you said you'd do it, but you never did. I didn't want to send the wrong message, okay? So, but the other time I cried was when I was writing this chapter on sextortion. This is how it's brutal. It's a terrible, terrible crime. So sextortion happens, in a nutshell, a perpetrator gets a nude or partially nude image of an or video. They can get it by hacking, by catfishing. Catfishing is when someone creates a fake online persona to lure someone into an intimate relationship. They've never met. Okay, for a lot of us, I'm 52. That's like totally new. Like, how could you feel love and connection with someone and you've never met them? Well, it's a reality. It is a 21st century reality. So Jonathan, I would never do it, but we pretend to be a 15-year-old girl new in town. And we go on to social media and try to lure another young person into an intimate relationship, and we feel close, I would have a very convincing social media profile, and then I would ask for a nude. Sextortion also happens in in-person relationships. So there's a couple, they're dating, the nudes are exchanged, and then one of them wants to break up. And the person depicted in the image wants to break up. And so the other says, if you break up with me, I'm going to send your nude to your parents, your priests, your friends, everybody. Or you've just broken up with me. If you don't come back to our relationship, I'm going to release your nude. Okay? So that is a terrible crime called sextortion. And how many of you have heard of sextortion? All right. Wow. I'm impressed. That's the greatest percentage I have ever gotten by far. So it is something we have to be talking about. It's something we have to educate people about. And the best way to prevent ourselves from being targets of sextortion is to not take nudes. Period. Don't take a nude. That's one of the things I'd like to drive home to young people. Yes?
You're not taking questions yet.
I'll take it in about 1 minute. Okay. So that's sextortion. Again, we can talk more about that. Dating violence. Dating violence is something that I don't know why I've never been able to kind of figure it out. But for whatever reason, for this topic, more than any other I teach on, people aren't connected to. They think dating violence only happens in other communities. They don't realize dating violence happens in every community. And dating violence, when we think about dating violence, we think about black eyes, and that's definitely part of dating violence. But I interviewed a lot of survivors of dating violence in my book, and almost all of them said the same thing. My physical injuries healed. It's the emotional trauma that stays with me that I cannot shake. But you can't necessarily see that. And we commonly, we dismiss some of the red flags of a violent relationship because we think, oh, it's puppy love, they're figuring it out, it's a little jealousy. And we shouldn't be minimizing it. I'm not saying that every relationship is violent. Obviously, most of them aren't. But there are red flags of a violent relationship. And I'm happy to share any of those red flags. And that's how we can maybe tell that there's a violent relationship, because we commonly dismiss it as just young love and we'll figure it out. Yes, with that, and then I'll come back to you. Go ahead.
What would you have to say about a young person that has developmental disabilities, that is being bullied, sexually harassed, things like that, that maybe, because typically maybe that individual wouldn't be affected as much as a young person that doesn't experience, say, autism or whatever it is, maybe.
Well, those are somewhat unique challenges. There's a lot to kind of debrief on that. There's a lot of moving parts of what you just said. First and foremost, if someone is afraid for their physical safety, you should always go to the police. That's what I tell them. If you were ever afraid for your physical safety, I would go to the police. Also, I would look at the school handbook. I get a lot of calls from people, mainly during the school year, people who know what I do, and they say, hey, this is what's happening at my school. My kid's being targeted for cyberbullying, being harassed, and I always say the first thing is go to the handbook. What are the school policies? What are the school district policies? So I don't know if that answers your question, but if we want to get into more specifics, just come by after. Go ahead.
So, a couple of things. I think people take teen dating violence, especially the psychological part of it, they take it lightly because they take adult dating violence psychologically. So if they don't take it seriously from adults, they're definitely not going to take it seriously.
That's a really good one.
But on the sextortion part, I was wondering if you do any follow-up on the catfishing part and what happens to those children who are catfished and then they're blackmailed into pornographic videos, further, really, I went to at NCJ, I went to a session on this, and they have a whole area of federal government that investigates this on the dark web, because That's how a lot of kids get really drawn into trafficking and all sorts of other things.
Yeah. Thank you for those questions. The first one, the difference between dating violence and domestic violence is not a lot, okay? But the reason why we use different terms, domestic violence versus dating violence, is that in domestic violence, they may be married, they may share a bank account, they may have kids. Where in dating violence, you're probably not going to have those, those circumstances. But other than that, it's the same. It's the same. And for years and years and years, I think for a lot of us, we didn't really understand how serious domestic violence is. And for a lot of us, again, I'm 52, it was the O.J. Simpson trial where it kind of opened up a lot of people's eyes to how dangerous domestic violence is. Now, both boys and girls, men and women, are abused. I want to be very, very clear. I should have mentioned that. Boys are abused in relationships. But one of the biggest differences between genders is that women, girls, are more likely to suffer severe physical and sexual violence. Part two of the second question on sextortion. So what happens in catfishing, first of all, the FBI, Department of Justice, says that sextortion is the fastest growing crime online targeting women. Well, the average age of a sextortion victim is 15, okay? And so when they're catfished, first of all, so someone pretends to be someone they're not. And so it's a perpetrator. And let's just see, okay, it could be a woman who's a perpetrator. The data's not really showing that very much, but there are definitely females who are perpetrators. But I'll say he for now, so please excuse me for that. So let's say the perpetrator, he's catfishing somebody, let's say it's a boy, and let's say the catfisher is pretending to be a boy, and he wants those nudes. Now, what's one of the terrible, terrible things about sextortion is when perpetrators are brought to justice, and it doesn't happen enough, what police and FBI are finding is that it is very, very common that that perpetrator will have 10, 20, 30, 100 victims. I've seen cases where they had hundreds of victims. So they have images and videos. And so once they get those images or videos, typically what they're going to go back to the victim and say, if you don't send me more, I'm going to release this nude to your parents. If you don't meet me for sex, I'm going to release the nude. If you don't pay me money, I'm going to release the nude, and so on and so forth. Now, could you go, if you're a victim, not you, but if someone you know was a victim of sextortion, could you go to the police? Of course you could go to the police. If it's a minor, the FBI is where you go. The FBI has great resources when it comes to investigating these crimes. And you can't say with law enforcement they're always going to give their attention to every crime. Sex crimes against minors are taken very seriously, and it is very likely to be investigated. And the reason why we know that a perpetrator has hundreds of victims is because one brave person came forward, one brave teenager came forward to a trusted adult, went to law enforcement, and they investigated, and then they were able to help all those other people who were victimized by that sextortion. Yes?
I was surprised that there's not a commission of sex trafficking there by other minors. Most people always think it's adults who are sex trafficking. But we've had several examples where services for young minors who serve for sex trafficking other minors.
Yeah, it's not something, I don't talk about sex trafficking in the book. It does happen, there's no doubt about it. If I had more space, it's 344 pages. If I wanted to push it out more, I would, but there's just certain things I had to cut. And when it comes to sex trafficking, if we're talking about it online, it really relates to, I talk about grooming. And one way sex traffickers appeal to teens is by grooming. And grooming is essentially where an adult, or if you're talking about a minor, reaches out to somebody else and then becomes their friend, someone they can lean on, someone they trust. And then once they have this bond, then they'll ask them to do whatever it is they want them to do. So no, it's not directly involved in sex trafficking.
We see a lot of it in low-income neighborhoods where young people are arranging with young We see a lot
Yeah.
actually happening now.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, this book is really about prevention. And I don't have a great technique, for preventing someone from, going off and doing that. I would imagine the minor, are they being tricked by the other person?
Usually there's an adult trafficker that's
Yeah.
kind of groomed that teen
Yeah.
to then
We have
get
to-
other teens.
Yeah, it's coercion. It's not obviously limited to Lincoln or Nebraska. We have the same, unfortunately, the same else in Los Angeles as well, and everywhere else, sadly. Anybody else have a question on part 2? Okay, let's jump to part 3. Part 3, staying safer online, digital footprint and citizenship. Oh man, digital footprint. Woo, that's a biggie. And I do a lot of speaking about my book, and I get asked to teach on chapter 8 more than anything else. Chapter 8 keeps me really busy. And I'm happy to talk about it, but it's not easy to talk to young people about their digital footprint because they think they know everything about it. Right? You talk about sextortion, you talk about the police, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I could learn a little bit about this, sure, tell me. You tell them about their digital footprint. They think because they have a Finsta, a fake Instagram account, which essentially is an Instagram account only their good friends have access to, they think that they can post whatever they want in their Finsta because why would their friend ever leak anything? Oh man, I got stories for you, they're in the book. And one of the stories, it went viral, it was about 4 years ago. It was out of Maine, a young woman, I forget her name, but she won, her dream was to win the Maine Lobster Festival gala. Okay, anyone from Maine? All right, okay. I didn't know there was a Maine Lobster Festival, goddess, king and queen, whatever, that was her dream. So she became the queen, she I think was 17, she got her crown, her dream come true, and an hour after she was coronated, they stripped her of her crown. Why? Because a friend, or someone had sent in 2 images that she had taken. 1, she was vaping, underage, and 2, she was drinking alcohol. Okay? When she was interviewed, the story went viral, because like a lot of people didn't think they should have revoked her crown, taken her crown. And so it made international news, and basically she said, I put those on my Finsta, only, quote, my exclusive friends had access to that Finsta, and I deleted them a year before the patent. What does that tell us? I love telling that story to young people. I love telling that story. 1, because it's kind of funny, because it's the Maine Lobster Festival. Who thinks about that? Right. But also because she was interviewed and she says that I deleted them a year ago and only my exclusive friends had access to it. All right, so that's your digital footprint. But one of the things I really like to emphasize in that chapter when I'm teaching on that topic is that it's not just creating a profile or creating a footprint that's carefully, that you're careful about so you don't have a misstep. There's also a positive aspect of this. That you can create a really good, positive digital footprint that is the best reflection of you. So that when people like me are looking to hire somebody, or a college administrator who's looking into a candidate's digital footprint, because they're checking you. Over 45% of college administrators are checking out some of their candidates' digital footprints. Over 90% of employers are checking out some of their candidates' digital footprints. So they're checking. And so when they're checking, what do you want them to find? It's just not about, I don't want anything bad. Why not put something good? And it's not fiction. It's something you're probably already doing. Maybe you've got a good grade on a test and it's a really hard class for you. You could share that. It could be something you're passionate about. I love this. And you're sharing it on your social media for people to see. And I always advise young people, do it with your parents' consent and your guardian's consent. You have to be smart about this. But when I hire people, I'm a supervisor in my office. I supervise 20 people. And when I hire, it's really competitive. You all know how competitive it is out there. And I do the same thing every time. I narrow down to 2 or 3 candidates, and then I do a super deep dive into their digital footprints, and what I have found have caused me to take a pass on somebody, or at times have tipped the scales, and I've hired people based on what I've seen in their social media. And I'm talking about, I couldn't decide between 2 candidates. I love them both. I only have 1 position. How am I going to decide? It's in their digital footprints that I've made my decision. It's a serious thing. You got to curate your digital footprint. Okay, so that's chapter 8. Chapter 9 in the book, and when I teach this, I always start with the question. The police have a search warrant, okay? And for the first time in the history of policing, they're going to give you a choice where they're going to search. Huh? They're going to search your phone, or they're going to search your house. You get to choose. How many people would say, go ahead, search my house, my phone's off limits? And all the hands go up, right? We keep so much private data on our phone. You know, the GPS coordinates of pictures we've taken, who we've taken them with, our calendar, where we're going, who we're seeing, people we've called, on our internet searches, place, you know, where we browse on the internet, and so on and so forth. Yet people, so many people, adults included, do not implement even the most basic steps to ensure their digital privacy stays intact. I show of hands with young people. I'm going to ask you guys, how many young people, when I ask, how many of you share your passwords with your friends? All hands go, like, what? What do you, and my youngest son, he told me last year, he said, oh yeah, Dad. I said, well, your screensaver changed. He goes, oh no, Dad. We just passed each other's phones around class, and people just put their I go, please don't do that. Please don't. That's a bad idea. A webcam cover. Like, everyone should have a webcam cover. It's like $3 on Amazon, or you put a little piece of black electric tape there. Basic things like that. And so what I think there's like 21 things you can do to ensure or enhance your digital privacy. And I say in the chapter, I go, there ain't anybody who's going to do all 21. But you just do 1 or 2. If you do 1 or 2, you're going to be way better off than you were before you did that. So that's chapter 9, chapter 10. I don't think I need to spend a lot of time talking about cyberbullying. You've all heard about it. You've all talked about it. Some of the interesting and troubling things from that chapter. One is that, you know, I always thought cyberbullies were strangers, right? They just see you, they don't like you for some reason. No, the data shows that most cyberbullies are friends or acquaintances with their targets. So typically, the target of the cyberbully knows who the cyberbullies are. Also, you know, when I was in high school, many years ago, we knew who the bullies were, right? And at the end of the day, you walk home or you go home and you have a little refuge, you have a little peace. Not so anymore. They're always on their devices, and cyberbullying can feel inescapable. And one of the really important things, obviously there's a lot in the chapter, that I like to drive home is that, you know, like sexual harassment, bullying commonly happens in front of other people. And, you know, it's really important that if it happens in front of you, first and foremost, don't participate. Okay? And some people, an LOL is participating. And for some people, not participating is the best they can do. And that's okay. If that's the best they can do, that's okay. But others will be able to summon the courage to say something in real time, not confrontational. You're not trying to rescue anybody. We're helping people who are in pain or who are vulnerable. And it doesn't, again, not confrontational. Hey, that's not funny, or ignore them. Say something in real time that can be supportive of the target. But if you didn't do anything at the time, no problem. You can say something kind to the target at a later date. And that's another thing that stuck with me. So when I reflect back on my 5 years writing this book, there's a few things that just stick with me. And one of them is the importance of a kind word. To never underestimate the importance of that kind word. And the reason it stuck with me is when there's a lot of data, a lot of research, a lot of interviews in the book, and one of the things that I kept seeing over and over was that when a young person was suffering great pain because of a sextortion situation, a cyberbullying situation, sexual harassment, and so on, when they were able to turn the corner and get the help they deserve, and they were able to heal, and they were interviewed by me or an academic or somebody else over and over when they were asked, how'd you do it? How'd you turn the corner? I kept seeing the same, one of the same things was someone said something nice to me. Sometimes it was a stranger. Honestly, I didn't believe it until like the 5th or 6th time I read it. I was like, man, don't ever underestimate the importance of a kind word. Even if it's a week later, hey, you didn't deserve that, you may want to talk to somebody, or that's not true, or that person's not nice. It takes 2 seconds, okay, 5 seconds, to say something. It could be a stranger, but to you, it's a nothing. To them, it could just be that little bit of comfort that they need to seek help. And so that was a huge takeaway for me. Chapter 11, smartphone cameras. Oh man. So I told you a little bit that I was doing things as a teenager that I wasn't supposed to be doing. Shame on me. I was a good kid, okay? But they didn't follow me into adulthood because I didn't have a camera in my pocket. Right? We had Polaroids. Those cameras sucked. Expensive film, took crappy pictures, and I didn't carry it with me because it didn't fit in my pocket. If I were growing up today with my issues as a teenager, oh man, I would have probably taken a picture that would have followed me into adulthood. And when I applied for a job as a prosecutor, it made it much more difficult. But that's not, the world the children we're working with, our children. This is not their world. They were always walking around with an incredibly powerful computer with a high-resolution camera in their pocket, and in an impulsive moment, they may take a picture, and in another impulsive moment, they send that picture, and once they hit send, we all understand, it's gone for good. Think about how significant that is. That as a 13-year-old, I may take a nude because someone's pressuring me, coercing me, manipulating me, and in an impulsive moment, I take that nude and then I send it, and it's gone forever. So I spend, the camera chapters awfully, they're all my babies. But that camera chapter is heavy duty. I talk about revenge porn, which is really technically called image-based sexual abuse. Most people call it revenge porn. Essentially, what happens sometimes when you send that nude, and there's a breakup, that person who has your nude, out of revenge, out of spite, out of power and control, you name it, they're going to take that nude, they're going to upload it to a revenge porn website, they're going to tag the person, and make the photo with the person's name, where they go to school, where they work. Hard to get them taken down. So when we talk about revenge porn, I also talk about when underage sexting can be a serious, heavy-duty felony related to child pornography. Just to be technically correct, it's really not, shouldn't be called child pornography, it's child sexual abuse material, but it's commonly referred to as child pornography, so I will refer to it as that. So essentially, if Jamie, forgive me, there's a Jamie. If Jamie, who's 16, takes a topless image and sends it to somebody else, she has committed multiple felonies related to child pornography, even though it's an image of herself. And when I teach this to teenagers, they just cannot wrap their head around that. But it's me. It doesn't matter. The laws haven't kept up with technology. Child pornography laws are meant to protect children, but sometimes they're being used to prosecute children. It's a miscarriage of justice as far as I'm concerned, a misapplication of the law. But there's nothing I can do about that except to educate you. So again, a big part of that chapter is about the potential consequences of a nude going from, an intended recipient to everybody, and what that can mean, to your mental health, how you can get help, and like I mentioned in sextortion, the best advice I can give young people: don't take nudes. Don't take nudes. Period. If you are of age to consent to sexual activity, just meet. Why are you going to send pictures? Just meet, right? Don't send nudes. questions. We got about 9 minutes. I just have a couple other slides that will take 30 seconds. So, does anyone have a question on part 3 of the book? Yes.
With kids being younger as they get smartphones, and a lot of parents realistically are not having these conversations before they put those devices in their kids' hands. Do you have it, by the time we get in contact with some of these kids, their digital footprint is a ginormous nightmare.
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions on how we can help rehab that digital
Yes.
footprint?
Yes, there's a lot you can do. It's not easy. There is, in the appendix of the book, there's some information beyond what I can cover right here. There are services that are solely dedicated to helping wipe a negative digital footprint. Some of those services are expensive, some of them are less expensive. But the simple way of doing it is populating your digital footprint with good things. Because the bad stuff will probably get buried. When most people Google you, very, very rarely will they go past page 2. Very rarely. So if you can populate good stuff, the bad stuff will be harder to find. So yes, there's information in the appendix, but there are books dedicated just to that. There's websites dedicated just to kind of cleaning up. And one of the things I do say when I'm teaching on chapter 8, before you apply for a job, before you apply to college, go through your digital footprint. Make sure, you may want to unlike some things. You may want to stop following people who are controversial. You may want to read over your posts to make sure it's the best reflection of you. Next question. Yes?
Do you have anything in your book that covers Snapchat? I have a lot of kids that I talk to who think that if they post on Snapchat that it's safe because it doesn't disappear.
Exactly. Right.
Do you have anything in there?
Yeah, I do. I mentioned Snapchat in chapter 11. I talk about Instagram and some of the major social media sites and apps, but I really don't focus on individual apps because I have to update the book every year. Because it's always changing. But I do talk about Snapchat. One of the things I say, I tell a true story at school where I teach. One student sent a nude video of himself to his girlfriend. She opened it on Snapchat, and there was another guy who was watching, and he screen recorded. He took a video of what she was watching, and he sent it around the house. Rude. And I do say this in the book, but when I teach this in person, I always make sure that my hosts are okay with it, because if I'm at a faith-based institution, they don't want me to say this, and that's okay. But I like to remind people, and it's in the book, that if you aren't going to take my advice, if you're going to send a nude, after all the potential problems this could cause you with the police, with your school, and so on and so forth, don't show your face. Don't show your face. He has shown his face. It was a bad situation. Poor kid. Yeah. Mistake. But he's a teenager. Teenagers make mistakes. Any other questions on this chapter? Okay, so in wrapping up, there's 2 recurring themes in my book I want to just point out. One is not suffering in silence. Anyone who picks up the book will see I say that a few times because I wish I knew that. I was suffering as a teenager. I didn't feel I could talk to my parents. I just didn't think I could talk to them. But there's other people I could have talked to, a trusted adult. I could have talked to my coach, my basketball coach. I could have talked to my best friend's dad, who always asked me how I was doing and cared about me, but I just never talked to him. Don't suffer in silence. It's hard to make things get better if you suffer in silence. And what I also like to point out is that if you're in a cyberbullying situation, let's say, you may not, there's lots of reasons why you may not want to tell your parents, you're afraid you're going to lose your device, and so on and so forth. But one of the reasons may be, well, what do they know about cyberbullying? How are they going to help you? Well, they may not, but they care about you. They're going to have your back, and they'll help you get through this together. The other thing I always like to point out, and it's in the book, is that there's no mistake we can't get past. Anytime I'm teaching on these topics, there's probably a few teens out there who may have made a mistake related to something I'm talking about. And I'm living proof that we can get past mistakes. I speak all over, I travel. If you're interested, I'll give you my email at the end, but I also am on this part of the Speakers Bureau for Safe and Sound Schools. Here's my contact info. Again, I didn't come here to sell books. I came here to talk about my book. Thankfully, I don't make my living as an author, so there's no pressure. If you want to get the book, it's on Amazon. The 8 or 9 I have here, if someone wants to purchase those, you can use my Venmo, or I can give you my Zelle. Otherwise, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.